USWNT progress at Olympics but fresh approach needed to be gold medal contenders in Tokyo. With 1 minute left in the final match of Group G in the Olympic women's football tournament between the United States women's national team and Australia, the Tokyo Games broadcast feed cut to Alex Morgan on the bench. They rebounded nicely with a 6-1 win against New Zealand, but Tuesday's draw to Australia was a step backward, even if it was all they needed to advance. "We came with the mindset that the first goal was to win the game and the second goal was to put in a good, professional performance and not get scored on," coach Vlatko Andonovski said. A listless, scoreless outing is not an inspiring way for the USWNT to advance to the knockout stage of the Olympics, but there are no style points in soccer, they advanced, and that's the important thing. United States coach Vlatko Andonovski's conservative approach has got the team to the quarterfinals, but they are not playing like contenders for gold yet. USWNT caps off worst Olympic group stage in 25 years. With Tuesday's result, this is USWNT's first time not winning their group in an Olympics since women's soccer was added to the Games back in 1996. Even when the Americans lost their opening match of the 2008 Olympics, they still managed to top their group before winning gold. In World Cup play, the USWNT has only ever failed to win its group once in 2011. Now, the Americans must face a more difficult path where they will either face Netherlands, the team they faced at the 2019 World Cup, or Brazil, one of the perennial favorites in big competitions. This is uncommon territory for the USWNT, and no one will feel the pressure more than Andonovski, who has consistently worn a tense look on his face in news conferences for the first time in the job. He didn't want the USWNT to play the way it normally does against Australia, asking for a more conservative approach. It was either a shrewd tactical decision or a lack of confidence in his team to play the role of aggressor. After all, the players have been here before, several were on the team that lost in the group stage of the 2011 World Cup to Sweden and finished second in the group. That team, the only one not to top the Women's World Cup group, reached the World Cup final, falling only to a penalty shootout. The USWNT didn't look like itself. That was a frequent theme throughout the evening in Kashima. The Americans looked to be holding back instead of flying forward and playing ultra-aggressively, as they so often do. But the bigger reason was almost certainly the presence of Sam Kerr, the striker who had scored 3 of Australia's 4 goals in their first 2 games, and the player who has won a Golden Boot award in leagues on 3 different continents. But for the danger of Kerr in transition, the USWNT can be just as lethal, particularly against an Australian team with defensive vulnerability. The one thing that surprised me a little bit was that they were passive in their pressing, said Australia coach Tony Gustafsson, who was the USWNT's assistant coach when they won both the 2015 and 2019 World Cups. The few times the Americans did have the numbers advantage going forward, they looked rushed and unprepared to use interplay to beat the Australian defence. Take Chris's press breakaway in the 55th minute, she never even looked for the trailing runners behind her, going straight at goal and shooting right to Micah. In the post-match news conference, when Andonovski was asked about whether it's difficult to ask the USWNT to dial it back and play more conservatively, Morgan smirked, as if to admit it's not how the USWNT usually likes to play. Ever since the USWNT opened the Olympics with a loss to Sweden, whether it shook their confidence or revealed something that was already there, the Americans just haven't looked the same since. Alex Morgan, though she had headed the United States into the lead but her goal was disallowed. Regardless, the Americans should have taken confidence from that moment, and they had a further hour to try to score again, but they never did. As the second half dragged on without a goal and players felt heavy legs, Both sides seemed to came to grips with the idea that a 0-0 draw wouldn't be so bad, so maybe they should stop running themselves ragging trying to score. For the Americans, a draw was enough to guarantee them a spot in the quarter-final. The Olympics women's soccer tournament features just 12 teams, even as the men's tournament features 16 teams, and it's high time it be expanded.